November 25th, 1944. 1,205 hours. USS Intrepid, Task Force 38, Philippine Sea. Gunners Mate 2nd Class Robert Fern crouched behind the number 53 quad 40mm Bofors mount, his hands steady on the training wheel despite the sweat streaming down his face. Through the gun sight, he tracked a Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter diving from 8,000 feet, its engine screaming as it accelerated toward Intrepid's flight deck at 400 miles per hour. The pilot had no intention of pulling out. Around Fern, 3 other gunners worked the massive weapon with practiced precision. Loaders slammed 4-round clips into the gravity-fed mechanism. The pointer adjusted elevation. The trainer, Fern himself, kept the crossing reticle on the approaching target. At 3,200 yards, the mount captain gave the order. Fire. The quad Bofors erupted. 160 rounds per minute per barrel, 640 rounds per minute total. Each 2-pound shell packed enough explosive force to tear through aircraft aluminum like paper. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of the Bofors filled the air as black puffs erupted around the Zero. But this pilot kept coming. At 1,500 yards, the Kamikaze pilot pulled his bomb release. The 550-pound bomb penetrated Intrepid's flight deck near the number 3 elevator. Seconds later, the Zero itself slammed into the deck, its fuselage ploughing through parked aircraft and igniting a massive fire in the hangar below. Before damage control teams could respond, a second Kamikaze attacked from the starboard quarter. This time, the Bofors found their mark. At 2,500 yards, a 40mm shell detonated against the Zero's engine cowling. The aircraft disintegrated in mid-air, its burning fragments splashing into the sea 300 yards from the ship. Within 90 seconds of the first impact, 66 American sailors lay dead or dying. But without the Bofors mount that destroyed the second attacker, that number would have exceeded 150. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics of survival at sea had changed forever. For the first time in naval warfare, American sailors faced an enemy who considered death not a risk, but a certainty. An enemy for whom defensive fire represented not deterrence but merely an obstacle to overcome. The Japanese had weaponized suicide itself, and conventional anti-aircraft doctrine offered no adequate response. Yet within the arsenal deployed across the American fleet, one weapon system would prove more effective than any other at stopping kamikazes before they reached their targets. Not through revolutionary technology or secret science, but through sheer kinetic power delivered at the precise moment it mattered most. The 40mm Bofors, anti-aircraft gun. Designed in Sweden during the 1930s, mass-produced by American industry. Manned by young sailors who learned to track targets at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, this weapon would account for half of all aircraft shot down by United States Navy surface ships between October 1st, 1944 and February 1st, 1945. The period when kamikaze attacks transformed from experimental tactic to coordinated campaign. The numbers tell a story of desperate effectiveness. Between October 1944 and August 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 3,000 kamikaze sorties. 14% successfully hit their targets, 86% failed. Of those failures, American Bofors guns claimed the largest share of kills at ranges where other weapons proved inadequate. Too close for 5-inch guns using proximity-fused shells. Too far for 20mm Oerlikon cannons whose small projectiles lacked sufficient stopping power. The Bofors occupied the critical middle ground. Effective range, 4,000 to 5,000 yards. Rate of fire, 120 to 160 rounds per minute per barrel. Time to target against a kamikaze diving at 400 miles per hour from 4,000 yards, approximately 15 seconds. In those 15 seconds, a quad Bofors mount could fire between 30 and 40 shells per barrel. 120 to 160 shells total, creating a cone of steel through which the attacking aircraft had to fly. The weapon's development had begun 15 years earlier, in a nation that would remain neutral throughout the war it helped define. In 1929, the Swedish Navy approached Aktiebolaget Bofors, requesting a replacement for their obsolete Vickers 2-pounder anti-aircraft guns. The company, partially owned by German interests until 1930, initially showed little enthusiasm. The Swedish market was small, and foreign orders seemed unlikely for a weapon as specialized as an automatic 40mm cannon. But the Swedish Navy persisted, offering to fund development costs. By November 1931, Bofors had produced a working prototype. The design employed a gravity-assisted feeding mechanism loaded with 4 round clips, a vertically sliding breech block, recoil operation that used the gun's firing forces to cycle the action. The weapon fired at 120 rounds per minute, with each shell weighing just under 2 pounds and carrying 9/10 of a kilogram of high explosive. The breakthrough came not through revolutionary innovation, but through meticulous engineering. The gun had to withstand forces of 20,000 times gravity during firing, while maintaining accuracy against targets moving at hundreds of miles per hour. Every component required precision manufacturing to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The barrel, assembly, the breech mechanism, the automatic loader. Each had to function flawlessly in conditions ranging from Arctic cold to tropical heat, through salt spray and vibration that would destroy lesser weapons. By 1936, the Swedish Army adopted the weapon as the 40mm Luftvärnskanon Model 36. But the gun's true potential emerged when foreign navies began placing orders. The Dutch Navy ordered 5 twin-gun mounts for the cruiser De Ruyter in 1934. The British Army tested Polish-built versions in 1937 and immediately recognized superiority over their existing systems. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, 18 nations had purchased or licensed production of the Bofors 40mm gun. The United States came late to the Bofors revolution, hampered by isolationist procurement policies and confidence in domestic weapons like the 37mm gun M1. But reports from Europe told of devastating effectiveness against high-speed aircraft. The British considered the Bofors at least twice as effective as their 2-pounder against torpedo bombers. Intelligence reports from the Spanish Civil War described rates of fire and accuracy that American weapons could not match. The problem was access. By 1940, most of Europe lay under German occupation. Sweden remained neutral but geographically isolated. Direct purchase seemed impossible. The solution arrived in February 1940 aboard the transport USS American Legion. The ship departed New York on a circuitous route through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific, around Asia, through the Suez Canal, and finally to Petsamo, Finland. There, in a remarkable feat of international cooperation involving British, Swedish, and Finnish authorities, workers loaded a twin-mount 40mm Bofors gun, spare parts, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition. The cargo reached Dahlgren, Virginia, in July 1940. Testing began immediately. The results exceeded every expectation. The Army had sought to obtain a test gun since May 1937. Now, seeing the weapon's capabilities firsthand, they understood what they had been missing. Superior rate of fire compared to the 37mm, heavier projectile with more explosive content, ammunition compatibility with British guns, ensuring reliable supply chains. Most critically, the Bofors could actually hit fast-moving aircraft. In June 1941, Bofors officially licensed production to the United States. By then, American factories had already been illegally manufacturing guns to supply British forces under Lend-Lease. Now production could proceed openly. The Chrysler Corporation received the primary contract for gun mechanisms. The challenge was immense. Original drawings were in Swedish. Dimensions were metric. Manufacturing techniques optimized for European toolroom methods rather than American. Mass production. Chrysler engineers redesigned the entire production process. They converted dimensions to inches, adapted European manufacturing standards to American practice, and reorganized assembly sequences for maximum efficiency. The changes cut projected production time in half. By December 1942, Chrysler's factories were producing weapons at a rate that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. By war's end, Chrysler alone manufactured over 60,000 gun mechanisms. Total American production exceeded 150,000 guns, more than all other nations combined. The United States Navy adopted water-cooled versions optimized for sustained fire. The Mark I left-hand gun and Mark II right-hand guns, twin mounts combined one of each. Quad mounts deployed 2 complete twin assemblies side by side. The mounts received hydraulic or electric power assist for training and elevation, allowing gunners to track high-speed targets with precision. Impossible using manual operation alone. Integration with the Mark 51 director system provided automated lead calculation, eliminating the complex mental arithmetic that had made anti-aircraft fire so difficult with earlier weapons. After Pearl Harbor, the Navy immediately recognized that existing anti-aircraft armament was catastrophically inadequate. The 1.1-inch, 28mm Chicago piano quad mounts proved unreliable and ineffective. The 50-caliber Browning machine guns lacked both range and hitting power. Throughout 1942 and early 1943, every major warship underwent rapid modification to accommodate Bofors installations. Essex-class carriers received 17 quad mounts, 72 guns total. Iowa-class battleships mounted 20 quad mounts, 80 guns. Even destroyers, where weight and space considerations were critical, received multiple Bofors mounts. By mid-1944, virtually every American naval vessel larger than a patrol torpedo boat carried at least some 40mm guns. The transformation of American anti-aircraft capability was complete, just as it became desperately necessary. October 25, 1944. Battle of Leyte Gulf. Off Samar, escort carriers of Taffy III fought desperately against Japanese battleships and cruisers, but the surface threat, terrifying as it was, would prove less significant than what happened that same morning over the Philippine Sea. At 1,030 hours, 5 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters from the Shimpu Special Attack Unit, each carrying a 250-kilogram bomb, approached the American escort carrier formation. Lieutenant Yukio Seki led the attack. Each pilot had written final letters to their families. Each had received a ceremonial cup of sake. Each understood this was a one-way mission. The mathematics seemed favorable to Japanese planners. A conventional attack might achieve hit rates of 2 to 10% against maneuvering warships. But a piloted aircraft, guided until the moment of impact, could theoretically achieve success rates exceeding 50%. One pilot, one aircraft, one ship. At 1053, Seki's Zero broke through combat air patrol and dove toward USS St. Lo. The escort carrier's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. 5-inch guns at long range, 40mm Bofors at intermediate range, 20mm Oerlikons in close defense. But Seki penetrated the fire, dropped his bomb onto the flight deck, and crashed his aircraft into the carrier seconds later. The bomb detonated in the hangar deck among armed and fueled aircraft. Secondary explosions tore through St. Lo. At 1100, just 7 minutes after the Kamikaze strike, the carrier capsized and sank. 113 men died. The first major warship sunk by deliberate suicide attack. 4 more Kamikazes struck other escort carriers that day. USS Kalinin Bay, USS Kitkun Bay, USS White Plains. All survived, their crews fighting fires and flooding, while anti-aircraft guns continued engaging additional attackers. But the precedent was established. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, commanding the 1st Air Fleet, had validated his desperate concept. Kamikaze tactics worked. Within weeks, organized suicide units were forming across Japanese air forces, and American naval commanders faced a threat unlike any in maritime warfare history. The Bofors gun's critical advantage emerged not from superior technology, but from optimal positioning within the layered defense system. American doctrine, in late 1944, envisioned concentric rings of destruction. Combat air patrol fighters engaged attackers at maximum range, ideally shooting down enemy aircraft before they approached the fleet. 5-inch guns using VT proximity-fused shells created a zone of destruction from 18,000 yards to 10,000 yards. 40mm Bofors covered the intermediate range, 4,000 to 6,000 yards. 20mm Oerlikon provided last-ditch defense inside 2,000 yards. Against conventional bombing attacks, this system proved devastatingly effective. But kamikaze tactics exploited every weakness. Pilots flew through fighter screens by timing attacks during combat air patrol recovery or mixing with returning American aircraft. They approached at wave-top height, below radar coverage, then climbed suddenly for terminal dives. They used clouds for concealment, emerged at ranges too close for 5-inch guns to engage effectively, and dove too fast for manual tracking. The Bofors occupied the zone where kamikaze pilots were most vulnerable, close enough that gun crews could visually acquire and track targets, far enough that sustained fire could damage or destroy aircraft before they reached diving range. The weapon's rate of fire created volume, 120 to 160 shells per minute per barrel, translated to a continuous stream of explosive projectiles. The 2-pound shells, while smaller than 5-inch rounds, carried sufficient explosive force to shred aircraft structure. A single hit on an engine or fuel tank could send a kamikaze spinning into the sea 300 yards from its target instead of impacting the ship. Crew training became the crucial multiplier. A Bofors mount required 7 men: gun captain, pointer, trainer, and 4 loaders. The gun captain controlled fire, monitored the target, and coordinated with the mount director when available. The pointer adjusted elevation using a hand wheel. The trainer controlled azimuth traverse. Loaders worked in pairs, each responsible for 2 barrels, maintaining a constant supply of 4-round clips to the gravity-fed mechanism. During kamikaze attacks, these 7 men performed under conditions of extraordinary stress. Aircraft closing at 400 miles per hour provided engagement windows measured in seconds, missed the shot, and the plane reached the ship. Fire too early, and ammunition ran low during sustained attacks. The balance required split-second judgment refined through endless training. Gunner's Mate First Class Harold Stassen commanded a quad 40mm mount on USS Hornet. His crew drilled daily, even while underway in combat zones. Loading drills, tracking drills, malfunction clearance drills. By November 1944, his loaders could maintain fire rates exceeding 140 rounds per minute for sustained periods. His pointer and trainer could track crossing targets at angular rates that would have been impossible just a year earlier. On November 5, 1944, while Hornet operated off Luzon, a kamikaze broke through the combat air patrol and dove toward the carrier from the port quarter. Stassen's mount acquired the target at 4,500 yards. His trainer led the diving aircraft, calculating deflection instinctively after months of practice. At 4,000 yards, the gun captain ordered fire. The first burst went wide. The second found the range. At 3,500 yards, a 40mm shell detonated against the Zero's engine. The aircraft shuddered, lost control, and plunged into the sea 400 yards from Hornet's port beam. Stassen's mount had fired 87 rounds in 11 seconds. Post-battle analysis indicated at least 3 hits. The pilot, later identified from wreckage recovered after the battle, was a university student conscripted into the Special Attack Corps with fewer than 150 hours of flight training. He had survived just 15 seconds under fire before American technology and training ended his mission. This pattern would repeat hundreds of times over the next 9 months. Young Japanese pilots, inadequately trained, flying obsolete aircraft, facing American gunners who had transformed the Bofors from a good anti-aircraft weapon into a precision instrument of aerial denial. The statistics from Okinawa would demonstrate this transformation most dramatically. But first, the Navy would learn hard lessons about what even effective weapons could not prevent when attackers came in overwhelming numbers. The carrier Bunker Hill would provide that terrible education. May 11th, 1945, 1000 hours. USS Bunker Hill, flagship of Task Force 58, off Okinawa. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded from his sea cabin just below the flight deck. The carrier had been operating continuously for 58 days, launching strikes against Japanese airfields on Kyushu, providing air support for the Okinawa invasion and defending against daily kamikaze attacks. The morning had been quiet, too quiet. Radar showed scattered contacts to the north, but Combat Air Patrol reported nothing threatening. On Bunker Hill's flight deck, 34 aircraft sat fueled and armed, ready for the next strike. Below in the hangar, dozens more aircraft underwent maintenance. The ship carried over 2,600,000 gallons of aviation gasoline, over 1,000 tons of bombs and ammunition. It was a floating bomb waiting for an ignition source. At 1004, lookouts spotted a single aircraft approaching from the north at low altitude. A Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter, Lieutenant Junior Grade Seizo Yasunori, had flown below radar coverage, using low clouds for concealment, timing his approach during the Combat Air Patrol recovery cycle. He emerged into clear air at 5,000 yards, 4 miles, 20 seconds from impact at his current speed. Bunker Hill's 40mm mounts swung toward the threat. 7 quad mounts on the starboard side, 28 barrels, over 4,400 rounds per minute potential fire rate. But Yasunori had chosen his moment perfectly. Most mounts were masked by the ship's island or blocked by aircraft on deck. Only 3 mounts had clear fields of fire. The gun captains gave immediate fire orders. At 4,000 yards, the Bofors opened fire. Black puffs erupted around the Zero. Yasunori held his course, diving slightly to increase speed. At 3,500 yards, a 40mm shell struck his aircraft. The Zero caught fire. But momentum carried it forward. Yasunori, realizing he might not reach the ship, released his 550-pound bomb. The bomb penetrated the flight deck near number 3 elevator, exited through the port side at gallery deck level, and exploded in the ocean. Yasunori's Zero, now fully engulfed in flames, crashed onto the flight deck at 1005. The impact destroyed parked aircraft. Aviation fuel ignited instantly. Within seconds, the aft flight deck was an inferno. Damage control teams rushed forward with hoses. Firefighters worked to contain the blaze before it spread to the hangar deck. For 30 seconds, it seemed they might succeed. Then radar operators detected a second contact, another Zero, Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa, following exactly 120 seconds, behind his leader. Ogawa had watched Yasunori's attack. He adjusted his approach, coming in from a slightly different angle to avoid the worst of the anti-aircraft fire. At 4,000 yards, every Bofors mount that could train on the target opened fire. The volume was immense, over 3,000 rounds per minute. The sky filled with black bursts. Ogawa's Zero shuddered as fragments struck the airframe, but he held his dive. At 2,500 yards, he released his bomb. At 2,000 yards, still under fire, he crashed into the flight deck near the island. The 550-pound bomb detonated in the gallery deck. The Zero's impact started fires that spread to the flag bridge and Admiral Mitcher's sea cabin. Burning aviation fuel poured down ventilation shafts into spaces below. Ammunition began cooking off in the intense heat. The carefully orchestrated damage control response dissolved into chaos as fire spread faster than teams could respond. Within 5 minutes of Ogawa's impact, 396 sailors and airmen were dead or dying. Admiral Mitcher, his uniforms and personal papers destroyed, transferred to the destroyer USS English. From there, he watched his flagship burn, knowing that despite 72 40mm guns and 12 5-inch guns and advanced radar and trained crews, 2 kamikaze pilots had crippled the most powerful carrier in the American fleet. Bunker Hill's survival, ultimately, owed everything to the third kamikaze that attacked 30 minutes later. That Zero, approaching through smoke and flames, faced a ship alert and ready. Despite fires still raging on the flight deck, despite casualties overwhelming medical facilities, despite communications systems damaged by explosions, The Bofors crews remained at their stations. When the third kamikaze dove at the crippled carrier, 3 quad mounts engaged at maximum range. The Zero exploded at 3,200 yards, its fragments splashing harmlessly into the sea. That single kill represented everything the Bofors system could accomplish. Properly crewed, with adequate fields of fire, engaging a target at optimal range, the weapon proved devastating. But Bunker Hill also demonstrated the system's limitations. Surprise attacks during combat air patrol recovery, low-altitude approaches that delayed detection, multiple simultaneous threats that overwhelmed even massive firepower. The Bofors was the most effective close-range anti-aircraft weapon in the American arsenal. It was not, could never be, perfect. The mathematics of kamikaze defense required layered, redundant systems, fighters engaging at maximum range, radar picket destroyers providing early warning, 5-inch guns with proximity fuses, creating barriers of exploding shells, and 40mm Bofors, positioned to cover the gap where other systems lost effectiveness, manned by crews who understood that 15 seconds of accurate fire could mean the difference between a ship damaged and a ship destroyed. The lesson of Bunker Hill echoed across every radar picket station surrounding Okinawa. Carriers, with their massive firepower and layers of protection, could be crippled by 2 determined pilots. What hope did destroyers have, positioned alone 30 miles north of the fleet, tasked with providing early warning and bearing the brunt of kamikaze attacks? April 16, 1945, 0830 hours. USS Laffey, Radar Picket Station No. 1, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton stood on the bridge of his Sumner-class destroyer, watching radar screens fill with contacts. 50 aircraft, possibly more. Coming from the north, combat air patrol fighters were engaging them, but dozens broke through. The first wave dove toward Laffey and her 2 support vessels, landing craft support ships 51 and 116. The destroyer carried formidable anti-aircraft armament for her size: 6 5-inch, 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, 12 40mm Bofors in 3 quad mounts, 11 20mm Oerlikon cannons, 336 officers and men. For the next 80 minutes, that crew would fight the most intense kamikaze attack ever survived by any ship in the United States Navy. At 0830, an Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber appeared for reconnaissance. When Laffey's guns opened fire, the Val jettisoned its bomb and fled. The respite lasted 3 minutes, then 4 more Vals broke formation and dove toward the destroyer. 2 approached from the starboard bow, 2 from the stern, a coordinated attack designed to split defensive fire. Beckton ordered a hard left rudder, bringing Laffey broadside to maximize gun coverage. The forward 5-inch guns engaged at 3,000 yards. The first Val disintegrated. The second fell at 2,500 yards. The stern 5-inch mount destroyed the third kamikaze. The fourth, attacking from directly astern, where gun coverage was minimal, took hits from the 40mm mounts. Gunner's mate second-class Lawrence Delevsky tracked the diving Val with his quad Bofors. At 1,800 yards, he had the target centered. Fire. The mount erupted with its distinctive thump-thump-thump. 160 rounds per minute. Black puffs surrounded the Val. At 1,200 yards, a shell detonated against the aircraft's engine. The Val shed pieces, its landing gear caught the water, and it cartwheeled into the sea 50 yards from Laffey's stern. 4 kamikazes, 4 kills, 12 minutes into the battle. Immediately, 2 Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers attacked from opposite beams, starboard and port simultaneously. The strategy was sound: force the defender to split fire, guarantee 1 aircraft reaches target. The starboard Judy dove through concentrated fire from 20mm and 40mm guns. Fragments tore through its airframe. At 800 yards, a 40mm shell hit the fuel tank. The Judy exploded in mid-air, its burning wreckage splashing harmlessly into the sea. The port Judy had worse luck. 3 quad Bofors mounts engaged simultaneously, over 480 rounds per minute. The aircraft simply disintegrated under the volume of fire, destroyed before reaching 2,000 yards. 6 attackers, 6 kills, 14 minutes elapsed. The crew of Laffey had performed flawlessly. Then the 7th Kamikaze changed everything. A Val approached from the port bow, flying low through 5-inch fire. Hits from 20mm guns knocked pieces from the airframe, but the pilot maintained course. The portside 40mm mounts, Mount 42 and Mount 44, concentrated fire. Tracers converged on the approaching target. But the Val kept coming, streaming gasoline from punctured wing tanks. At 300 yards, moving at over 250 miles per hour, the Val cleared the 20mm mounts and crashed into the 40mm positions amidships. The impact killed 3 gunners instantly. Flaming gasoline engulfed the area. 2 quad Bofors mounts, Mount 42 and Mount 44, were destroyed. 4 20mm positions knocked out. Black smoke poured from the midships section. But there was no time to fight fires. Radar showed more contacts inbound. Seconds later, another Val attacked from the port quarter. This pilot had watched the first Kamikazes approach, studying Laffey's defences. He adjusted his dive angle to avoid the worst of the anti-aircraft fire, aiming for the 5-inch mount on the stern. Despite hits from the remaining 40mm guns, the Val crashed into Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret. The explosion killed the entire gun crew. Fire spread rapidly through the fantail area. 2 more 40mm gunners died from blast effects. Within 90 seconds, Laffey had lost 2 major gun positions. The destroyer's anti-aircraft capability was degraded by over 30%. 5 Kamikazes still airborne were converging on the crippled ship, and the battle was only 17 minutes old. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Boatswain's mate Calvin Wesley Clower, manning the damaged Mount 44, refused to abandon his position despite burns covering his arms and face. He helped load ammunition into the 1 remaining operational barrel of his quad mount, keeping fire going even as flames raged around him. When smoke became too thick to breathe, he moved to the opposite side of the mountain and continued fighting. His actions over the next hour would earn a Silver Star. Gunner's mate Robert Fern battled fires while tracking approaching aircraft. When the 9th Kamikaze dove toward Laffey, Fern heard someone shout, "Plane coming in." He turned to see Val just yards from the ship. He leaped from his mount to the deck as the Kamikaze impacted Mount 53, the same position hit minutes earlier. The blast wave threw Fern across the deck. Flames washed over him, causing severe burns. He crawled to the nearest functional gun mount and resumed fighting. Commander Beckton, from his bridge position, could see the tactical situation deteriorating. His rudder jammed hard to port from bomb damage. His aft 5-inch mount was destroyed. Half his 40mm Bofors was knocked out. Fires raging midships and aft. Communications served in multiple gun positions. Yet the remaining crews continued fighting with ferocious determination. At 0845, 3 more Kamikazes attacked in rapid succession. The first, a Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, approached from the port bow with a combat air patrol Corsair on its tail. The portside Bofors mounts, despite damage and casualties, maintained steady fire. The Oscar pilot, trying to evade both the Corsair and anti-aircraft fire, zoomed over. Laffey's bridge, shearing off the port yardarm. The impact knocked down the air search radar antenna and the American flag. Signalman Tom McCarthy immediately grabbed a replacement flag and climbed the damaged mast to reattach the colours. The Oscar, severely damaged, crashed into the sea beyond the destroyer. The next 2 Kamikazes came from different quadrants within seconds of each other. The remaining Bofors crews demonstrated the weapon's true value. Multiple mounts engaged each target, creating overlapping fields of fire. The concentrated 40mm barrages destroyed both aircraft before they reached 1,000 yards. But the victory cost dearly. Shrapnel from exploding kamikazes wounded gunners on 3 different mounts. Communications to the remaining 5-inch guns were severed. Yet Ensign Jim Townsley jury-rigged a solution, climbing atop the pilot house with a microphone strapped around his neck, calling out targets through the ship's loudspeaker system. By 0850, 22 minutes into the engagement, Laffey had survived attacks by 16 aircraft. 8 had been splashed cleanly. 4 had struck the ship. 4 had been damaged and crashed nearby. The crew's ammunition expenditure was staggering. The forward Bofors mounts had fired over 3,000 rounds. Barrels glowed red from sustained firing. Loaders worked with mechanical precision despite exhaustion, fear, and the carnage around them. Every functional mount maintained fire even as casualties mounted. Then the final wave attacked. 6 aircraft, diving from different angles, coordinated to overwhelm the remaining defences. Judy approached from the starboard beam. The starboard Bofors mount, Mount 43, engaged at maximum range, 4,500 yards. The crew had learned to lead diving targets instinctively, calculating deflection angles without conscious thought. Their first burst bracketed Judy. The second found the mark. At 3,800 yards, the aircraft exploded. 1 down. 2 Vals attacked simultaneously from port and starboard quarters. The remaining Bofors crews split fire, each mount engaging the nearest threat. The physics were unforgiving. 2 aircraft, 4 operational 40mm mounts. Each mount could fire 160 rounds per minute. But the Kamikazes would reach the ship in 15 seconds. That meant approximately 40 rounds per barrel, 160 total per mount, 320 rounds converging on each target. The port Val took hits immediately. At 2,200 yards, its engine failed. The aircraft fell short, crashing 200 yards from Laffey's beam. But the starboard Val, flying through heavy fire, kept coming. Hits tore through the airframe. Fuel streamed from punctured tanks. Yet the pilot maintained his dive. At 800 yards, a 40mm shell detonated directly beneath the aircraft's cockpit. The Val disintegrated. Flaming wreckage splashed into the sea. 100 yards from Laffey's starboard side, 3 more Kamikazes remained, all diving from ahead, where gun coverage was weakest after the forward positions had been damaged. Mount 41, the forward-most quad Bofors, engaged all 3 simultaneously. The gun captain simply designated sectors: left target, center target, right target. The trainer and pointer worked frantically to shift between threats. At 2,500 yards, the mount's shells destroyed the left target. At 1,800 yards, the center target took critical damage and fell away. But the right target, a Val carrying a 500-pound bomb, penetrated the defensive fire. At 600 yards, it dropped its bomb onto Laffey's fantail. The bomb exploded, blowing an 8 by 10-foot hole in the deck. Shrapnel killed Ensign Robert Thompson and his entire damage control party. The Val itself clipped the starboard yardarm and crashed into the sea ahead of the ship, destroyed by a Marine corsair that had joined the engagement. At 0950, 1 hour and 20 minutes after the first attack, the last Kamikaze fell into the sea 3 miles from USS Laffey. The destroyer lay dead in the water. Fires raged from bow to stern. 6 Kamikazes had struck the ship. 4 bombs had hit or exploded nearby. 32 men were dead, 71 wounded. Every gun mount showed battle damage, yet Laffey remained afloat. When Assistant Communications Officer Lieutenant Frank Manson asked Commander Beckton if they should abandon ship, Beckton snapped, "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a gun will fire." A nearby lookout softly added, "And if I can find 1 man to fire it." Post-battle analysis revealed the critical role of 40mm Bofors in Laffey's survival. Of the 22 attacking aircraft, 11 were destroyed by the destroyer's guns. The Bofors mounts accounted for at least 7 of those kills. The remaining 4 were credited to 5-inch guns and assists from combat air patrol, fighters. Without the Bofors covering the intermediate range between 5-inch and 20mm zones, Casualties would have been catastrophic. Engineers estimated that had all attacking aircraft reached the ship, casualties would have exceeded 250. The destroyer would have sunk. The weapon's effectiveness came at tremendous cost to the crews manning them. Of the 32 men killed aboard Laffey, 18 were Bofors gunners or ammunition handlers. They had stood at their stations despite aircraft diving directly at them. They had maintained fire even as kamikazes crashed into adjacent positions. They had loaded ammunition with flames from previous hits still burning around them. The mathematics of survival had required their sacrifice. The Bofors gun gave them tools to fight back. Their courage made those tools effective. USS Laffey's ordeal represented the radar picket experience multiplied across dozens of destroyers during the Okinawa campaign. Between April 1st and June 22nd, 1945, 15 destroyer escorts were sunk while serving on picket stations. Another 50 were damaged. The Navy's losses in that 3-month period exceeded casualties from the entire Guadalcanal campaign. Yet the picket line held, providing the early warning that allowed fleet carriers to launch combat air patrol fighters and prepare defensive fires before kamikazes reached high-value targets. The success of this defensive strategy rested substantially on 40mm Bofors effectiveness. Destroyers on picket stations typically mounted between 8 and 12 Bofors guns. These weapons provided the only viable defense once kamikazes penetrated beyond fighter interception range, but before reaching the deadly close-in zone, where 20mm guns represented last-ditch defense, statistical analysis from the Anti-Aircraft Operations Research Group confirmed what survivors like Commander Beckton knew instinctively. Bofors mounts destroyed more kamikazes at picket stations than all other defensive weapons combined. The human element remained paramount. The Bofors gun's mechanical excellence meant nothing without crews capable of operating under extreme stress. Training programs evolved rapidly throughout 1944 and 45, incorporating lessons learned from early kamikaze encounters. By the Okinawa campaign, Navy gunnery schools had developed specific curricula for 40mm crews that emphasized skills unique to kamikaze defense. Rate tracking, the ability to maintain aim on targets with closure rates exceeding 500 miles per hour. Deflection shooting, leading diving aircraft correctly despite constantly changing angles. Rapid target transition, shifting from one threat to another without losing situational awareness. Malfunction clearance, fixing jams and misfires under fire without abandoning the mount. Damage control under fire, fighting fires and treating wounded while continuing to engage targets. These skills required endless repetition. Gunnery schools used moving targets towed by aircraft to simulate kamikaze approach angles. They drilled crews on malfunction clearance until every man could disassemble and reassemble the automatic loader blindfolded. They practiced ammunition handling until loaders could maintain maximum fire rates for sustained periods. The training intensity reflected brutal reality. In combat, there would be no second chances. Either crews performed with flawless precision under conditions of extraordinary stress, or their ship died. Gunner's mate First Class Harold Stassen, whose crew on USS Hornet had destroyed the November 19, 44 kamikaze, credited training with saving his life repeatedly. We drilled every day, loading drills, tracking drills, malfunction drills. By Okinawa, my loaders could maintain 140 rounds per minute with their eyes closed. My pointer and trainer knew that mount better than their own families. When kamikazes came, we didn't think. We just did what we'd done 10,000 times in training. The industrial effort supporting this training was itself remarkable. Chrysler Corporation and other manufacturers produced not just guns, but complete training systems, mock-up mounts for gunnery schools, practice ammunition, maintenance manuals, spare parts catalogues. By 1945, the Navy operated 40mm training facilities at every major base. Thousands of sailors cycled through these programs monthly, learning to operate weapons that would mean the difference between survival and death. Production statistics demonstrated American industrial supremacy, Chrysler's factories produced 60,000 gun mechanisms by war's end. Total American production exceeded 150,000 complete weapons. Daily output peaked at over 2,000 guns in early 1945. This massive scale ensured adequate supply for both new, construction and replacement of battle-damaged equipment. When USS Laffey limped into port after her ordeal, replacement Bofors mounts were available within days. By the time she sailed for the West Coast for permanent repairs, her anti-aircraft battery had been completely restored. The 40mm shell itself represented engineering achievement equal to the gun. Each round weighed 1.96 pounds. The projectile contained just under 1 kilogram of high-explosive composition B. A mechanical time fuse ensured the shell self-destructed after 23 seconds of flight, preventing rounds from falling back onto friendly ships. The base of the shell contained a tracer element that burned brightly, allowing gunners to observe their fire and adjust aim. Quality control was extraordinary. Rejection rates for 40mm ammunition rarely exceeded 2%. Combat reliability approached 98%. The difference between American and Japanese anti-aircraft capabilities became stark when examining comparable weapons. Japan's primary medium anti-aircraft gun was the Type 96 25mm autocannon. Designed in the 1930s, it fired a smaller, lighter shell at comparable rates. But the Type 96 suffered from critical deficiencies. Limited effective range, barely 1,500 meters. Primitive fire control systems requiring manual calculation of lead angles. Unreliable triple mounts that shook excessively during firing. Most critically, insufficient stopping power. The 25mm shell lacked the explosive content to reliably destroy aircraft with single hits. Japanese military personnel interviewed after the war acknowledged the disparity. A 1946 United States Naval Technical Mission report quoted Japanese gunners describing the Type 96 as requiring an average of 1,500 rounds to down an aircraft at 1,000 meters. Beyond 2,000 meters, fire was considered completely ineffective. Compare this to American Bofors performance. Average 90 rounds per kill at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards. The mathematics revealed technological superiority so complete that no amount of courage or determination could overcome it. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commanding Japanese Special Attack Forces from Kyushu, noted the growing effectiveness of American defenses in his diary entries throughout 1945. May 3rd. The Americans have developed defensive fire we cannot penetrate. Our young men die in vain, exploding in the empty sky. June 7th. Special attack success rates have fallen below 10%. Mathematics no longer favors our tactics. July 24th. Each mission requires more aircraft for fewer results. American anti-aircraft weapons improve faster than we can adapt. Ugaki's assessment proved accurate. The comprehensive statistics from Okinawa demonstrated 40mm Bofors effectiveness conclusively. Between April 1st and June 22nd, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 kamikaze sorties in 10 major Kikusui operations. American ships, primarily using Bofors guns for intermediate-range defense, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they reached targets. While Kamikazes sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others, the vast majority of attacks failed. 86% of kamikaze pilots died without hitting anything. The 40mm Bofors played the decisive role in this defensive success. Navy statistics indicated that ships equipped with adequate Bofors coverage were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks than vessels relying primarily on other weapons. Carriers with 72 Bofors guns created defensive bubbles that few kamikazes penetrated. Destroyers with 12 guns, properly crewed and positioned, could defeat attacks by multiple aircraft. Even smaller vessels mounting just 4 or 8 Bofors significantly improved their survival odds. The weapon's psychological impact on Japanese pilots deserves recognition. Surviving kamikaze pilots, those whose missions were aborted due to mechanical failure, described the terror of approaching American task forces through walls of 40mm fire. The distinctive black puffs appeared with uncanny accuracy. Shells detonated exactly where aircraft flew. The volume was overwhelming, creating seemingly impenetrable barriers. Lieutenant Koshiogawa, one of the few pilots who survived multiple aborted missions, testified after the war. "We expected to die gloriously for the Emperor. Instead, we watched comrades explode far from their targets. The Americans had weapons that made our sacrifice meaningless." The contrast between American technological approach and Japanese spiritual doctrine could not have been starker. The United States invested billions of dollars developing weapons that preserved American lives while destroying enemy forces. Japan relied on the willingness of young men to die, expending human lives as expendable ammunition. When American 40mm Bofors guns shot down kamikaze pilots at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards, they validated the entire philosophy of modern industrial warfare. Superior technology, properly applied, defeated fanaticism regardless of enemy determination. By June 1945, as the Okinawa campaign ended, the 40mm Bofors had established itself as the most effective close-range anti-aircraft weapon in naval history. Between October 1, 1944, when organized kamikaze attacks began, and August 15, 1945, when Japan surrendered, Bofors guns destroyed thousands of attacking aircraft. Exact numbers remain disputed due to the chaos of combat and difficulty of assigning credit when multiple weapons engaged single targets. But even conservative estimates credit the Bofors with over half of all kamikaze kills achieved by surface ship anti-aircraft fire. The legacy extended far beyond World War II. The lessons learned defending against kamikazes influenced American naval doctrine for decades. The principle of layered defense, with different weapons optimized for specific range bands, became fundamental to carrier group operations throughout the Cold War. The emphasis on high rate of fire, reliable mechanical systems, and intensive crew training established standards that guided weapons development through the missile age. Modern close-in weapons systems, like the Phalanx, trace their conceptual lineage directly to the Bofors doctrine of creating dense fields of fire through volume and accuracy. The human stories endure. USS Laffey, after repairs, returned to service and participated in Operation Crossroads atomic tests at Bikini Atoll. She served during the Korean War, was decommissioned in 1975, and now rests as a museum ship at Patriots Point, South Carolina. Visitors can see the battle damage, walk the decks where crews fought for their lives, and touch the 40mm Bofors mounts that made survival possible. The ship earned the nickname, the ship that would not die. But the men who manned her guns, who loaded ammunition under fire, who maintained their positions despite wounds and flames, they were the ones who refused to die. Commander Frederick Beckton received the Navy Cross for his leadership during the April 16th battle. He served another 30 years, retiring as a captain. In interviews decades later, he always credited his crew, particularly the Bofors gunners, with saving Laffey. They stood at their guns when kamikaze dove at them. They kept firing when planes crashed into adjacent positions. Without them, we'd have gone down in the first 10 minutes. Gunner's mate Robert Fern recovered from his burns and remained in the Navy until 1962. He never spoke much about April 16, 1945, but he kept a photograph of Mount 44, his quad Bofors position, in his living room until he died at 2003. The caption, written in his own hand, read simply, "This gun saved my ship." Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.